Don't tell anybody, but I'm
Okay.
I'm,
inside scoop.
Yeah, the inside scoop. This is if you watch this to the end, you get the inside scoop.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Webtoon Wave podcast. I'm your host, Audrey, and I have a really awesome guest today. I'm super excited to talk to her. She is the creator of Not So Silent on Webtoon. Please welcome Roseoak. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk about all this stuff.
I am so pumped. I just fell in love with Not So Silent when I was reading it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get her on the podcast. Like, I got to talk about this with her.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
A labor of love.
I can definitely see all the love that you put into it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just get into it. Give us an introduction to you. How did you get into webcomics? What has your journey looked like up until this point?
Okay, well, so I have been working on webcomics for a while. I actually started a couple before I ended up landing on Not So Silent, and that was like way back when I was like a freshman in high school that I started a lot of that. And they flopped like tremendously, so I restarted them a lot. And junior senior year in high school, I started working on the canvas version of Not So Silent. And some of the comics that I was like really interested in that kind of got me like started on the whole idea of just doing comics on the side was Long Exposure. I don't know if you've ever read that. Marzoids does a lot of like really cool queer comics, and I loved their art a lot, and I really liked the idea of sort of like a slice of life romance school story. Something else that like really drove me to like an idea of like the schedule that I was doing when I was working on the canvas version. I would stay up from like I'd get up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, and then I would stay up until like 1 a.m. doing
Oh my goodness.
the episode all in one day. And
wow.
A lot of that was because not only was I inspired to do it, but I had a family member in my house that got a cancer diagnosis. So I didn't really realize it at the time, but Not So Silent very much became like a visual diary to fictionally solve what was going wrong in my life a lot. With obviously like a lot of disability representation and anxiety and like panic attacks, the whole shebang. But that's kind of what really drove me to go full send into the comics. So yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that experience of kind of having comics be a way to cope with things that are troublesome in their lives, or just, a way for them to kind of decompress from stresses.
100%. Yeah, it's I do want to say that family member is all good. We're
good.
The cancer, knock on wood, has been taken care of. It was definitely like pretty hard too, because like being that intensely into webcomic making, I wasn't really taking like a reality check with what was going on at the same time, and I was still working on the canvas version when I got into my art university. And while my family member was really sick, I then ended up having to go to university and continue this comic at the same time. And that was when I got reached out to by, I think it was my editor. I forget. I'm pretty sure it was my editor that I got reached out to get contracted to make it in originals.
Did you end up finishing university, or did you kind of drop out to work on it?
No, I did end up finishing. I was it put the originals production on pause for like a really long time. So my Canvas readers, after I made the announcement for the original series, my Canvas readers were waiting about, oh god, I don't know, 2.5 years for the original series to drop. And a lot of people, I'm sure, didn't want to read it after a certain point because it took so long. But I still have some really awesome and loyal OG readers that stuck around for
That's
it to,
awesome.
yeah, get pushed into the final stage. It also took a lot of research, so that was part of it.
Mm. So,
Yeah.
how was it moving from Canvas to originals? What did that process look like?
Um, it was difficult because I never imagined I would be doing comics for like a job. That was never something that was on my radar. So um it was a little bit difficult being addressed professionally because I had no idea what I was doing, at the same time as having to do like my thesis for university, which I have some of that posted online, that I made like an art book. So it was like a lot of work on top of trying to communicate on like styles and visuals and things that I wanted for the original series. And another thing was I needed to have some help with the backgrounds because that was like my my weak link in the process, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to use any of like the assets that were available online because it just wasn't fitting like the world that I was imagining. So I asked one of my friends from my university then to hop on board the project. So it was kind of like, gathering the forces, gathering my friends to help me with some of the graphic design that ended up appearing on like the launch day, helping me with the backgrounds. And it's just like it was a pretty big coordinated effort, because I they're counting on me to like communicate with the editors, to write the script, to come up with the thumbnails, to come up with the text, and then basically tell them like what I need from them when I need it. And, for someone who hasn't worked, well, at that point, hadn't worked professionally in like an art job, it was just like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah, that's amazing that you had these people willing to help you and just help you make this process easier. I could totally understand the not wanting to use the 3D backgrounds for
Yeah,
your environments.
yeah. It was the background's actually part of the reason I wanted one of my friends to help me with it, which the friend that I got helping me with it, she was the trustee like scholarship recipient for my class. So she's insanely talented. She's crazy crazy talented. I wanted the world to look like kind of how high school looked like for me, and I wanted to lean very heavily into this concept that this is a fictionalized version of a lot of what went wrong for me in like, the struggles that I was having in high school, and how I wanted it to be like a relatable world for readers who might go through the same thing, and or might be going through the same thing. And a lot of the comment sections sometimes reflect like, oh, I thought I was the only one going through this, or I yeah, this is something that really drove me to kind of like step away from this school activity that was just stressing me out. So, like that kind of stuff. And I felt like the backgrounds were so important to kind of be like the silent setting of like, this is what this feels like. This is where these characters exist, and all that good stuff.
Was it kind of nerve wracking having to pitch your series to Webtoon?
Oh my god, yeah. I you did not hear this from me, but I low key was like crapping my pants. Like actually, um, I literally felt like so sick pitching my thing, and I genuinely was like, because this is good. So I had a message sent to me on Instagram when I was still working on the Canvas stuff, and I had just gotten the offer to pitch the series. And this message was like, "Hey, you stupid dumb idiot! I know that you're just some crazy stupid straight girl that fetishizes gay men, and you suck. And I hope you like, you know, I hope you fail." And it was like it was really disheartening because I was like, first of all, I in case anybody didn't know, I am very much not straight, and that is reflected in a lot of my stories. And I had struggled with that a lot um, during that time because I didn't know how to tackle that subject. So I felt like I had to like justify my queerness to some
Mm.
random stranger on the internet. And then
Ugh.
at the same time having the pitch of being like, hey, we want this to be an originals, where I was just like, oh crap, I don't know that I want to do this. Like, if I'm scared, like, is this gonna be the reaction? Because that is a pretty universal reaction when you have authors making like LGBT comics on Webtoon, because a lot of people just assume that it's like, oh, you're fetishizing it. That's basically the grand assumption of stuff. And it I felt at that time like Not So Silent is such an important story to me, and like a journey of like self-discovery, that I think that's why I felt so like scared to pitch it, because I was like, oh man, like this is such like an important thing to me. I don't want this to be like the constant reaction to it. um but I kind of had like a come to Jesus moment with myself, where I was like, all right, 5 years from now, I'm graduated from university with the art degree, and where do I see myself? And if I was like, where would I be without accepting this? Where would I be with accepting this? And the conclusion that I came to was like, I would regret that for the rest of my life if I didn't pitch it, or at least try to bring it to a bigger production level. Which like I said, I was still crapping my britches when I made the pitch, but I it was really great because in the years that were leading up to the launch, I had like a really strong support group of friends around me that really supported the project. And I was telling them I'm so nervous for like the reaction. And on launch day, they were on call with me, and I was pacing around my office, and I was like, I'm so scared because I just was like, am I just gonna have to spend like 2 to 3 years in this production defending certain topics that I've put in this comic? So yeah, it's very, I don't know if anybody is out there that is like debating on what they should do or not with like making a comic or pitching to originals, but like, if it's important to you, do it. But it's nerve-wracking, no question, no question. Yeah.
Yeah. And, especially when it is a story that is so close to you personally, like you have so much personal connection to it and it's really important to you, it definitely feels nerve wracking because you don't
Yeah.
want an editor to be like, actually, sorry, no, the story sucks.
Yeah, no, exactly. I won't go like into too much detail with it, but part of the reason the originals took so long, besides like what I've said already, is there was a lot of like, process of going through approving a deaf character and how I wrote him. And I, again, the message that I had gotten on Instagram had happened like 2 years before that. So it kind of was, it got me ready to be like, this is a story I believe in. This is a story that I'm going to defend. I had to be able to justify um, the research that I had done, because I had done interviews with my ASL teacher, which I can go into that later. She went to Gallaudet University, which is like the ASL university in DC, I believe. So, you know, and we had deaf teachers that came into the class. Like occasionally I interviewed them, I sketched in class when people were signing, and I made sure that I could make it like, as I basically everything I put into the comic, I want to be sure that I've had some real life exposure to, and I didn't want to ever write anything that I was just like, you know, pulling out of nowhere, which is also why the production took so long, because I was trying to reach out to people to be like, hey, please help me. I need to interview you. I need some like references. I need some help. I want to make sure this happens. This looks good. This is right. So yeah, there was a lot of that.
Yeah, that's understandable. You want to make things as accurate as you can, especially when you're dealing with a disability and a person using sign language to communicate.
Yeah, yeah.
So why don't you, for anybody who doesn't know the story of Not So Silent, why do you give us a little synopsis of the story?
So, Not So Silent is the story of a main character, Lewis Walker, who is like the good kid of the high school that it takes place in. He is the student council president, and he's got a lot of weight and standards on his shoulders. And one day, he is asked to give a tour to the new student named Fernando Montalvo, or Fern. And what they don't tell him is that Fern is deaf and nonverbal. And uh, they basically bring Lewis in to do the tour because he took like 2 seconds of ASL, and they think, oh, Lewis will know how to handle it. So it's kind of a journey. It's like a coming of age story, but it's a romance story as well, obviously. It's a story of navigating just being a young person and dealing with ableism, disabilities, people being homophobic. And, you know, one part that's not very heavily mentioned in the synopsis is that Lewis has autism. He has high functioning autism, but he's neurodivergent. And that also was a new element that I added into the story, because that was a big problem that I had in school as well, dealing with that.
So you said that you got inspired by your own personal experiences that you had in high school, but how did you come up with the idea of making Fernando deaf and nonverbal?
So, in high school, I loved language classes, so there was that. But I had been like doubling up on language classes, and I had one slot left to fill a class in, and one of the classes that was available that only our high school in the district offered was American Sign Language. So I was like, well, shoot, I'll take this class. So, you know, I knew that I was wanting to make a story, and the final puzzle piece was Fern's character. Because Lewis I had already designed, and I had like a concept of Fern's character from like some other random story. Like a lot of my friends and I wanted to make like group web comics in high school and stuff, that a lot of them never happened. But you know, when like the first week that I was in this ASL class, I was like, holy crap, like this is so like not spoken about, you know, like, and it wasn't just about the sign language. It kind of opened up this this conversation of what it's like to be deaf, for example, and have your surroundings completely not built for you. And I was dealing a lot with test anxiety and test problems in school, so I failed almost a ton of classes, and I was having my own little spat here and there with, for those who don't know, in America there's like, well, they're trying to get rid of it right now, but it's the 504 disability thing. I forget exactly what it's called, but you have to like apply for it to have test accommodations. And they basically wrote me back and said that I wasn't disabled enough to have
Wow.
accommodations. So getting into a class that was basically surrounding the subject of being deaf, being hard of hearing, just navigating, learning how people navigate a world that is not like, for the majority, for the most part, built for them. That was just like, holy crap, like this is ableism, like what these people are doing. And since I was taking the class, I had a lot of like direct references, and I was like, well, shoot, I'll make this character deaf. And I had a big talk with my editors that I wanted it to be more than just like, this character is deaf, like really was, I thought about it for a long time, and I didn't want it to be like a plot point, like it's a plot point, but I didn't want that to be his only attribute. I wanted to show that even in, it doesn't matter what disability you're talking about, that people are people, when you need accommodations for something or having trouble with something, that doesn't change the fact that you are a person, that you have a personality. And a lot of that is glossed over in a lot of public areas and school systems and that stuff, where people either infantilize, for example, they infantilize deaf people, hard of hearing people, or they're just straight up ableist. And that was like a huge point that I wanted to be sure that I could go further into Fern as a person rather than as the quote unquote deaf character, So yeah, that was kind of the catalyst for making him.
I really appreciate that early on we do get a look into his perspective. Like his
Mhm.
first day at a new school, he goes in the classroom, the teacher turns her back to him, and he's just, yeah, here we go. And then he just takes note of how inaccessible the school is already for other disabilities.
Mhm.
And I think it's such an important kind of representation to have in comics.
Yeah, that moment, especially in the comic, with like the door button being so high up, that I talked to my editors about that, and I was like, dude, we have to put this in, because in university, my bestie Westie roommate and I, uh we ended up getting one of the accessible dorms, in very big sarcastic quotation marks. And the first thing we noticed was, because we had a couple students that were wheelchair users on the campus, they put the door button behind where the door would actually open. And so my roommate and I, one day, we were like, dude, we gotta like pretend like if we were in a wheelchair, we gotta see if we could open this. And you literally can't, because there you'd have to go into like a bunch of rocks too to get
Oh
the,
man.
yeah, the button. And then we had a friend of ours who had gotten injured and was in a wheelchair, and we had them come into our dorm to like test out some of the, like the sink, the shower, like rolling in the wheelchair, and we had to catch them because they almost fell back and
Oh
like
my
hit their
goodness.
head, because it's just
Ugh.
not accessible. And that was a huge point where I was like, it is just so ridiculous how many buildings and places are just so, they claim to be accessible, they claim to be putting people in mind that might need these accommodations, and they're just doing it to get brownie points, essentially, to be like, hey, we meet the code for wheelchair users, look, we have the button that opens the door. And the building was new. That's the thing that was really baffling about it. So it wasn't like some ancient building, but that was a huge moment that kind of drove a lot of the beginning episodes of the comic, where Fern was like, "Oh my god, this classroom sucks."
So I was really curious about this, but as I was reading Not So Silent, there's not, I've hardly seen other types of media that is like trying to portray sign language, but
Mhm.
like in a drawing. Like you have A Sign of Affection, the manga series,
Mhm.
which is amazing.
Mhm.
But I wanted to know, how did you translate moving hands and signs into your drawings, and because that looks really difficult to me.
So it definitely helped taking the ASL class, cuz I was able to, cuz as we know, I like to animate. So I find like seeing the movement really important instead of the still images that a lot of like, you know, ABC catalogs have and stuff. Kind of the way I broke it down was like, it's vaguely based around the grammar of ASL, because it's kind of, it's not exactly like how French is spoken, but it's kind of similar in the sense where English, you have like the one part of the sentence first, like the subject first, or, like the sentence is basically reversed in French. It's sometimes similar in ASL grammar, and it's simplified a lot, where you don't sign every single word a lot of the time. When you're like going quickly, you sign the most important parts of what you're trying to get across to someone. So a lot of that was, is there like a subject that is really important in the sign that I'm drawing right now? Like, my favorite one to draw is, and to like edit, is like when Fern and Lewis are like pointing at each other, because that is like an emphasis of like, you are the subject of the sentence, and it's a sign that obviously you can't really go wrong with. um but it's just kind of, when there is like a person that is like being spoken about that's in the scene, I try to gear the sign more so towards that person. So that's kind of how I pick and choose which one I illustrate. But like, when it comes to like how like the arrows are pointing, like how the hands are going, um I definitely feel like the way I've drawn the signs has evolved already, because I'm on episode 47 right now, as we're recording this. And I I think what I was doing a lot earlier was illustrating too much of the hand movement, and it was very distracting. So kind of choosing whether you want to illustrate the hand at its starting point, like on the character's face or where it's located around their body, or if it would fit better in the panel to illustrate the ending point of the sign. So sometimes it kind of just depends on what fits best in the paneling. And it ends up being different every single time, which I don't think is a bad thing, because it does, while I do in the beginning encourage people to go seek out other sources to learn about ASL, and to not use Not So Silent as their sole source for
Uh-huh.
ASL, and for like the deaf community and deaf culture and all that stuff. It definitely, I wanted to kind of try and give it, as best as I could, a more authentic sort of feeling to how each character, when they're signing, has like almost a different accent on how they sign. So, Fern being obviously completely fluent in ASL, he usually makes more facial expressions than Lewis does at times. They all make a lot of facial expressions, but when signing, Fern is often the most expressive, and that's kind of like his flair on how he signs. And what I've gradually tried to put in is that Lewis starts to sort of get his own facial expression and flair into whenever he's signing, and as they become closer romantically, their signing and how they kind of go less about always signing with their body, where they sometimes touch each other's shoulders or point their fingers at their chests or and all that stuff, where it becomes like they as they grow closer, the way they speak to each other becomes almost intertwined, and they to fully communicate with each other, they need each other, like, they just like they I don't know how to explain it. Like, it I just want their the language is quite literally a love language, is
Yeah.
essentially what I'm going for. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's honestly so amazing that you are putting so much thought into like the progression of Lewis becoming more fluent in ASL. Is that, like Fern already he is very expressive. That's a very like that's the thing with ASL, right? Is
Mhm.
you kind of add the expressions to portray like the feeling behind what they're signing and stuff, right?
Yeah,
And
it oftentimes it's like the punctuation sometimes
yeah,
of what you're signing. Yeah.
yeah. I think that's amazing. Like you're putting so much thought into just like the growth that Lewis is experiencing and how he's becoming more fluent in it, and just those little touches are just I just love it so much.
Thank you. Thank you. So, in the Canvas version, Fern and Lewis, basically their personalities were inverted, and I've had a couple comments here and there. They're very, very few, but I've had a couple comments that don't like the change, and the main reason I was so happy that I was able to redo a lot of Not So Silent is because the way Lewis acted towards Fern and treated Fern was completely infantilizing his character. And, it was an early story. Like, I was a dumb teen doing stupid stuff, writing dumb stories. And that's what was what came out when I wrote it. And, I when I thought about it some more, I was like, no, 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 this needs to change. I want Fern to be this larger than life personality as a completely nonverbal character, because I think that that is like the perfect juxtaposition of showcasing how some disabled people can be infantilized to such a point that people don't think that they have like much of a personality, or they're just like, oh, you sweet thing, like it's okay. And I Fern as a character is very different from me, but I know how that feels because people don't know how to treat someone who needs accommodations here and there, but is still very much like an insanely large, like, character in the room and all that. It was just really important to me to have Fern be the catalyst towards the changes that Lewis makes in himself and in his life, that we'll see more so like eventually in the comic later on. But yeah, that was a really important change to me, and to the people who are asking about why I made that change. That's why we don't want to infantilize
Hmm.
characters in the new version of the story.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah,
also just to emphasize that even if a character does have a disability, that doesn't define them as a person. Like
absolutely.
there's so much more to them
Yeah,
than their disability.
yeah, 100%. And I think that was like that's been a huge thing working on the comic too, where um I don't even think about doing like, oh yeah, I gotta add ASL in here. Okay, whatever. Like it's not like a it doesn't really define who he is. Like it's a huge part of him, but it it's gotten to the point in the comic where I'm like, I need this scene to be this way because I need Fern's personality to show. And the ASL and all that stuff kind of just naturally gets integrated into it as I've worked on it, and it becomes like second nature to kind of weave that in to the panels and the scenes. Because if you go back, if you're a reader of Not So Silent, you go back and you reread through the episodes, I have to position some of the scenes and coordinate it with my background artist to where whenever ASL is used in the scene, that all the characters are facing each other. And it sometimes can I have to rearrange the episodes a lot when that happens, but it's a fun challenge to kind of figure out how to make that second nature in a comic where you don't really notice it after a certain point, and where you kind of end up having to break some of those storyboard animation rules that they tell you, you can't have this character facing this way in this scene. And this is a big exception for that, where you kind of have to break the quote unquote camera of the scene.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because I'm really curious, how has your experience with animation lent itself into your production process for a webtoon?
Well, it's helped a lot. Because I kind of go about certain sequences in the episodes as if I'm storyboarding them a little bit. So as I've kind of gotten more into the style and like the solid feel of the comic, um I will copy and paste certain panels that might be close-ups of like the face or of the same character doing subtle movements with like shifting the gaze, or like opening, like jaw open and then putting your finger down, where you're like, I had a point but I don't have it anymore, like that kind of stuff. The stuff that I would add into a storyboard if I was animating them. But I mean, honestly, when I started the whole comic thing, I had done a summer program at SCAD, and I wanted to go into 3D animation initially. And I was like, animation, I have to do it. That's my career. That's my calling. And I had been animating on this website called Toonator for a couple years with a mouse on a laptop. So I was like, I'm a professional animator. Like, I got this. So I had never touched a 3D program before until I did this week long camp. And oh my God, I broke that
Oh,
computer. I crashed the program,
oh my
and
gosh.
we were being taught by a professor who had worked on How to Train Your Dragon, and he had animated Gobber. And
Okay.
yeah, I broke my animation cycle, and I raised my hand and I was like, oh, this dude's gonna know how to fix it, like no worries. And he came up to me and he started like fiddling around on the computer, and then he just like sighed and he looked at me and he was like, I don't know what you did, but I don't know how to fix this. In my like 5 years of professionally animating, I don't
What?
know what you did. And I was like, crap.
What in the world?
Yeah, so I we were then taking a 2D animation class. So, and I liked that a little bit better, but I hated the final product that I had for it because I didn't know that the background was gonna, I didn't know how to like lower opacity on stuff. So my animation just, it looked like doo doo. But it was fun, but after that point the professor for the 3D course, he said, when you animate in studios for, like, with the 3D programs, you don't animate your own characters. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna be an animator then. So it was another moment where I was like, okay, do I really want, is animation more important to me, or is the story character aspect more important? So that ultimately led into going into visual development and character design, which is a whole other can of worms because AI is trying to take over that job field. So but I was like, I've always been really passionate about writing my own stories and designing my own characters, and I knew that it was always going to be something that I did on the side. And initially, I was trying to get a studio job, and as I was learning about all this animation, and like, it's what I know the most about is like the storyboard phase. So like blocking out what the 3D animators would then go in to clean up and all that stuff. So like choreographing scenes essentially. That's kind of my bread and butter in animation. And it's helped a lot when I'm trying to just like come up with thumbnails, like quickly when I've run out of buffer episodes and I have to do it like within the week. So
Yeah.
that's helped a lot. But yeah, that I have like I can go into like how the studio job thing didn't work out.
I would love to hear how that went.
Okay. So, I mean, this kind of does feed into ultimately why, like, I became so passionate about this story and why I got, like, so intensely into the comic stuff. So, we, at the university that I went to, there was a lot of like, we would watch these movies released by these big studios, and we would have, like, of course, our critique and all that. Um, and we'd be like, do we want to work for this studio? And we had some webinars and things where like the Sony animation crew for Into the Spider Verse came on and gave us like a whole thing of how they did their
Wow.
storyboards, how they came up with the visuals. So a lot of that was super inspiring for, like, obviously my own stories and for my friends too. So that fed into that. But when it came to our thesis stuff, we ended up having to basically, they did not require any sort of story writing class. And they didn't teach us like Adobe InDesign for like book designing or anything. They just kind of threw us in the deep end and said that the thesis is make a concept art book for your own story, which,
Wow.
I was like jumping up, clicking my heels, like, woohoo, this, yay, I love this stuff. But it was really interesting because it storytelling is a very hard thing to do because you're gonna get people that are critical of it, that they're
Yep.
gonna like certain parts of the story and they're gonna hate other parts. And that, I mean, I had been doing a lot of Instagram social media stuff up until that point, as I said earlier. So, I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm sort of getting used to hearing people being like, "Oh, this sucks." And, just being like, "Okay, that's nice," like, and just going on about my day. Um I used to like repost all the hate comments on my story and be like, "Everybody go roast this guy in the
Oh
comments."
no.
When I was in high school, I did that.
Yeah.
And I grew out of that, so fear not. But a lot of people got annoyed about that. But the whole thing with creating this thesis and creating this story, you had to get in front of a group of professional people from the industry and you had to basically present what you had so far for your idea. And they didn't frame it like this, but you had to be able to defend the idea.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Um, yeah,
thesis.
yeah. So it it was a little irritating because the story that I ended up doing, I was really passionate about, but a lot of the professors were like, ew, fantasy, everybody does that. And I'm just like, okay, well, I'm doing it too, so you deal with it. Um, but it was very disheartening because at that point, I had already been contracted with Webtoon for originals, so I had a little bit of assurance behind me knowing that I had something after college, after this thesis thing. And it it was really hard seeing some of my friends get critiqued to high hell. Like the stuff that the professor said were awful. Like some of it was just god awful. It was insulting a lot of the time.
Wow.
And some of my friends would come in and they'd be like bawling and like not
Oh,
really wanting to continue the idea. And as like I told you earlier, that I kind of went through that phase when I first was pitching Not So Silent, because that message that I got, that I was like, oh my god, like I don't know if I want to do this, like, and stand behind this idea. But it really was kind of like a full circle moment where I was just like, I'm a comic artist. Like, this is what I do. And I'm a storyteller, and I don't want to be in a job in the art field where I can't tell a story that I'm doing. So it kind of went from animator to storyboarder to visual developer to comic artist. And I learned a lot along the way for that stuff. But we had these one-on-one meetings with our professor. And we had to, after we got like this critique and we presented our idea, we had like a bunch of worksheets of like the notes and basically ratings for a bunch of categories that were based on what we had presented. So it was like world building, character design, all that stuff. So we had these evaluation sheets that each of these professors on this committee would fill out and rate us on these different aspects of our thesis. And there was one professor that didn't write any notes at all, and he like basically rated everybody super super low on everything.
what
And
in the world?
yeah, it was goofy, and he didn't like that I had androgynous characters in my thesis.
What what's what's wrong
Yeah,
with that?
yeah, and I that's literally I was like, and
Yeah, right. And
yeah, that's the point. That is literally the point. This character is non-binary. Congratulations. So it was, and I think he didn't really like that I was just like, okay, well, have a nice day. Like,
yeah.
and I was just like, okay, whatever. But he had said some stuff to some of my other classmates that like he didn't like the story, the designs for my friends, and they were so disheartened by this stuff. So what I ended up doing was I pulled my worksheet, or the evaluation sheet, from this guy out of this packet that we got, and I tore it up and I threw it away. And when I went out to like this little one-on-one meeting, and I was talking with the professor, which she had good advice to offer when it came to thesis, and she honestly was probably one of the professors that evolved the most towards the end of the thesis and the project. I went out to talk to her, and we had like these little timed conversations, and she was just kind of going over the notes and all that stuff. And then she was like, "Oh, where did this sheet go?" And I was like, "Oh, I threw it away." And she was like, "Why'd you do that?" And I said, "Because he didn't write anything on it." And she was like, "Oh, well, you probably shouldn't have done that." And what I said to her was, "Okay, so my problem with that is um, I don't get the courtesy of having notes on an evaluation sheet. So if he's not going to tell me what I could do to make the story better, I don't care."
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and that is kind of like a huge thing that evolved out of learning all this stuff with the going from the animation to the comic pipeline, where as you go further into the storytelling aspect of stuff, instead of just like, you know, animating what other people have designed, like you get critique in all of it, but it brings you to a point where you realize that the the ultimate goal is to stand behind your story, give the people a reason to want to care about it, even if it's generic, even if they think that it's been done before. Being able to defend why your idea deserves to be pushed further and deserves to have the critique and deserves to be worked on, and kind of just implementing all the stuff that you learn throughout that is that it was a huge transition. It's not where I thought I'd end up being, but I learned a lot and I'm still learning.
Yeah. Are there any tips that you could give other webcomic creators, maybe with storytelling or with production, time-saving tips like
Yeah, totally. I think that the biggest thing that I've told people, and I'm sure that many creators would say, is there is never a right time to start a story. If like if your script isn't finished, who cares? If your thumbnails aren't finished, who cares? If you have the idea, if you have passion behind an idea and you have a story that you want to tell, it will read in the comic. It doesn't matter how good you are at art. It doesn't matter how good you are at like dialogue writing. If you have something that you want to create into a story, you can do it. Like it does not have to be perfect. Like my Canvas readers know that when I started my art in high school, it was doo doo. It was, I mean, like compared to what I've learned and how I've evolved, it, it was not the best. And you know, but the story as I worked on it still carried over enough that um you know, people took an okay interest in it. Dog, I'm going to throw you out the window. Boy, down. I will feed you soon. Relax. You goober. I'm trying to have a philosophical discussion, you freak. Lie down. Oh my god. You are such a baby. Ugh. Lie down.
would you want to if he's like
Yeah,
hungry, you could
I'm
probably
gonna him real quick. It's put a pin in that.
okay.
I'll be back. You
Okay.
get more comedic content. One thing that I would say to like anybody who's wanting to start a comic, a novel, anything creative, any kind of storytelling thing, there is never a right time to start a story. It doesn't matter how polished it is. It doesn't matter if you're finished with it, if you don't know the ending, because the reality is the story changes as you work on it. So you're going to end up changing a ton of stuff anyways, but it's like when I first started on Canvas, my Canvas readers know my art was not great. But I was really, really passionate about kind of finding this comic as like an escape and telling this story. And even though the story was kind of not fully there and the dialogue wasn't fully there, people took enough of an interest in it that it that I guess they could feel the passion behind the story that I was trying to write. But you know, it's a labor of love. That's what any story is. You're gonna, like I said earlier, I um failed like 3 different web comics before. I honestly forget how many I started. And I just like I if I didn't like it, I didn't like the reception it was getting, I deleted it and I started over. So, some people it does happen overnight. They get really lucky. Their first try gets picked up right away. Some people, it takes years, which I am definitely one of those people. And it takes like a ton of tries. If you don't succeed at first, you don't succeed, try again. So that's a huge thing. And another huge thing is do research, like especially in these times that we're living in. Buy books, like go to your libraries, meet people, interview people. It's kind of daunting, but that's what like feeds into telling a good story. You have to push yourself out of your comfort zone and kind of put yourself out there to get the elements of the story that you're looking for. So that's a huge part of that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said. Whenever I ask that question, every creator is just like, yes, just start it.
Yeah,
Don't,
yeah,
like, of course, you want to prepare and like figure out what your story is, and you want to figure out your character design, the world that they're in,
yeah,
all
yeah,
that stuff. But it's like, it doesn't do you any favors if you just put it off because you feel like, oh, well, I don't have everything figured out, or everything isn't
exactly.
exactly the way I want it to be, right? And I
Yeah,
I think it just is better because you just learn so
yeah.
much along the way.
No, absolutely. I think because I've talked to a few canvas creators, and they have these great ideas, and um they won't post it, um because, and their art is already like at like such a great point to start like a canvas series. um and it's just like, and some people just don't feel comfortable doing it, which that's totally fine. It's everyone's individual choice. But some people are just like waiting for the right time to like get the perfect amount of script, to find the perfect character design for this one character that isn't really clicking. And the reality is that stuff, those kinks that you're having in the story, you will figure them out if you start the story. That has, at least for me, that has always been like that. Like my canvas series that I'm working on, it's called Love Theodora. I didn't really know that people were going to want a comic out of that, but
Mhm.
I kind of just fart out ideas, and I some of the plot lines get a little bit mixed up and stuff, but that's okay because if you were to go back and rework the story a little bit, you have the spine of the story there. And if someone else was doing that, you wouldn't have the story to work with if you didn't just go ahead and take the chance and post it. So, or like, put it out there. If you're looking for an audience, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And just another big point is, um you're going to get people who don't like your stories. That's just how it is. You're going to get people who just don't like you. um and I've talked a little bit about that already, but as someone who has, there are plenty of creators who have dealt with so much more than what is like visible in my comment sections on Webtoon and all that stuff. Which that's a hard part about being a Webtoon original. You don't really know how the audience is going to take it until it launches. Um, but the thing is, like, I when I went to art school, and a lot of my classmates could back me up on this. You hear some of the craziest stuff about your art. And I know I told you earlier, I had one professor that basically said that one of my characters looked like a plague stricken child with like smallpox or something.
Oh my
And
gosh.
he said that in front of the whole class. And I was like,
Oh my gosh.
it's really just a test of, do you take offense to it or do you start laughing because it's literally so stupid, like
Yeah.
why would anybody say that?
Hmm.
And the it you kind of it's hard to rewire that reaction, because when it's a story that's so personal to us, obviously your first reaction is going to be like, oh my god, like I'm severely offended by that. But I had something about like one of my self portraits looked like crap that I drew myself, and then I started getting like insulted by a professor on how my self portrait looked.
Oh
And
my gosh.
yeah, it was kind of like, oh my god, like am I offended for the art or am I offended for my face? Like
Oh my goodness.
what are we doing? So it happens everywhere. It happens in the webtoon comment sections, it happens in professional art studios, it happens at art classes, art school. It's 11-year-olds telling you that they don't like your story, it's adults telling you they don't like your story, which is why, going back to the whole thing with the thesis presentations, being able to be like, okay, but why don't you like my story?
It's like, tell me what's not working. Don't just say, it sucks. Tell me how I can make
Yeah,
it better.
exactly. And that was a huge thing too with Not So Silent that I really tried to be open to, because there's a lot to edit in the story with the representation of the characters. And I kind of had to brace myself a little bit for people to be a little bit, yeah, potentially rude about how they went about critiquing stuff. And it I think that it it ended up being a really nice, like, so far final look and product, because we went back and we had a little bit of bumps in the road here and there. And it was not like an easy reboot to do. There was just a ton of work, a ton of critique, and being nervous for the audience reaction to people being like, oh, I don't like how this character is portrayed, and just kind of gearing myself up for that and being ready. But when you kind of put your armor on a little bit and get ready for that, it honestly does allow you to make a story better, when because some people do have genuine good critique comments that they write in some of the webtoon episodes. But a lot of them are just hateful and ignorant sometimes when you're going down that path. But being able to um be flexible with the story, be flexible with the designs, because one of the things that we were told in art school that I think is really, it is true, that there is always like a better version of your idea that can be more polished, that can be more like tightened up and stuff. So being open to that idea of, rather than, oh my gosh, I'm so insulted by what this person said, it's like, okay, how can I take this and then make the story even better from that? So kind of trying to rework certain comments that, you know, kind of dig deep and hurt a little bit, trying to see, after you're upset by them, how you can either just ignore it or if that information can be useful to you as a creator.
I I think that the audiences for Canvas and for originals are really different too. Like there are some
Mhm.
people that
Mhm.
just read originals, and then there's people that read mostly Canvas. And
Yeah.
I found that most of the time Canvas readers are a lot nicer
Yes,
than the originals readers.
100%. It's that niche audience that they have to dig a little bit deeper to find those uh smaller, not picked up comics that and I think in the editing process, the a lot of stories, that's where they change really heavily, which obviously, but they're the story that the canvas readers were there for initially might not be what they're looking for when it goes to originals, which is kind of like the risk you have to take, and you have to ultimately decide, like, yes, this niche audience really likes this aspect of it, but what can I do to make the story better so that I'm proud of this story and so that I can give the message that I want to give. And sometimes that does cost a few readers from my experience, which it's not many, but it's there's a little bit of a reaction to it when you change such a niche story so heavily.
Yeah. And I like how you said that there's always room for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of canvas artists or just webcomic artists or just artists in general can relate to the feeling of wanting it to be perfect and wanting it to be super polished. But I feel like us indie creators, like we really shouldn't put that pressure on ourselves. Like this should really just be something that you just enjoy doing, that
Yeah,
you're passionate
100%.
about, and maintain that drive instead of worrying about the comments, instead of worrying about the subscriber numbers, the engagement. Like
Yeah.
just do it because it's something that brings you joy, and you know, maintain that motivation too.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people, kind of going back and forth from Instagram to Webtoon, a lot of people get very, like, smaller creators from who I've talked to and who I've gone to school with. They get really distracted by the numbers, which I had that phase absolutely in 2020, where when a post wouldn't get like a certain amount of likes, I would freak out because I'd be like, nobody wants to see this anymore. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And when posts start to gain traction and pick up attention, if you're not used to that, it can be daunting then to go back to the numbers that you were used to, because then you think that nobody wants to read your stuff, which is not true. What I tend to tell people is, when you have like a sudden interest in like a particular post or something, and you maybe gain like a ton of followers from like a reel or a TikTok or something that you make, you are gonna lose about 2/3 or so of that following that you got from that. But from that, you gain another third of a really loyal audience that
Yeah.
wants to see your stuff. And it takes a really long time to build up that pattern and to kind of come up with not only an art style or a story style, but like a social artist creator style. Um, it's it's definitely like a trial and error thing, and it doesn't happen overnight. That is the one thing I will tell people. It might happen for like webtoon stuff overnight, but for like promoting yourself and marketing yourself and showing people your story, it does not happen overnight at all. It takes a long time. So be kind to yourself when people don't immediately take interest in a story that you're doing, because that doesn't mean that there isn't an audience out there that doesn't want to read, that wants, or yeah, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you won't have an audience. It just means that you need to be patient and let the story evolve as it naturally will. And like you said, when you do something for the passion, readers can pick up so heavily on that, and they can find more enjoyment and life in the characters.
So before we end today, I just
Mhm.
wanted to ask, where do you see yourself in the future? Where do you see Not So Silent? Do you have stories that you want to do after Not So Silent?
Yes, I do. So first, I think if I ideally had my way with where I wanted to take Not So Silent, oh my god, I would love some kind of animated thing with it. I don't know the chances of that happening. It's a if that were to happen, it would definitely be a bit of a task animating ASL.
Yeah.
But The Dragon Prince is a show if anybody's interested.
I
Yeah,
love the Dragon Prince so much.
I love the Dragon Prince. Aunt Amaya,
Yep, I
the
love
way
them.
they go about her character, she's a great representation of a deaf mute
Yeah,
character. Um, and they really did their research and animated her
yeah,
signing beautifully with like
they
the interpreter.
did. They
Yeah,
really did.
it's so good. Um, so, ideally in like my fantasy land, I would love some kind of animated series for Not So Silent, or I don't know, like a movie, but
Yeah.
that is fantasy land. So, in more realistic land, I don't know, maybe someday, like I hope I can get into a bookstore. That would be really fun to get Not So
That would
Silent
be
translated.
amazing. Oh,
I would be
I would love
really
that.
happy. Yeah, if I could make it to that point and get maybe get a little bit more traction on the series and maybe get some kind of deal somewhere to do
Hmm.
that would be awesome. But for other stories that I'm working on, don't tell anybody, but I'm
Okay.
uh
Ooh,
I'm
inside scoop.
yeah, the inside scoop. This is if you watch this to the end, you get the inside scoop. Um, I am working on a sapphic vampire story that I've been posting on Instagram, and I am very likely going to pitch it for originals. So
Oh my
um,
gosh.
I've been talking to some people on the inside, and they told me that they'd be interested in seeing a pitch from it. So
Oh my goodness.
yeah, I've slowly started working on that.
Oh, that's so
So
exciting.
I'm so excited for it because the reception on it has been actually really kind of shocking to me, but I that was like an old storyboard assignment that I randomly did and I turned into a comic, and I've been putting it on canvas. And so we'll see where that goes. No guarantees, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
We'll see, but look out for that if you
Oh my
read
gosh.
that comic, everybody, because that will be fun.
I want that to be an original so bad.
If it does become an originals, oh man, I'm excited to work on the design some more and make it more period Victorian
Hmm.
accurate. So
Yes, yes.
yeah, but that's kind of that's the scoop. That's the inside scoop.
Oh my gosh, that is gonna be. Oh, I'm so excited.
Well,
Oh
I thank you. I appreciate the enthusiasm.
my gosh. And I hope you can get Not So Silent into a book deal. That would be amazing.
I would that would be just I would love to get it in Barnes and Noble.
Oh,
It would be a lot of work, but I'm gonna see if I can uh kind of do some searching and see how I can convince some people to maybe look into the story being printed in a bookstore somewhere. So
yeah, that would be incredible. Well, I'm crossing my fingers and my toes and everything for you.
oh, thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, Roso, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun to yap.
I love yapping.
Me too. I'm a professional yapper.
I mean, same. Okay, awesome. Well, everybody, I will include Roseoak's links in our show notes. You can go follow her on Instagram at Animator Roseoak. Go read Not So Silent on Webtoon. It is wholesome. It is wonderful. It gives me all the warm fuzzies inside. So go give it a read. It's amazing. If you found this episode informative or entertaining, give us a like, give us a follow. You can find us on our socials at the Webtoon Wave. You can listen to us on Spotify. You can watch us on YouTube. We post a lot of content on our Instagram. You can follow us there to stay up to date on future guests and news. So stay creative, stay inspired, and we'll see you next time.